Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Bonnie Cook, and I teach at Hudson Valley and am a member of the Voices Library Committee. We would like to begin today with an acknowledgement that we are gathered on the sacred homeland of the Muhikaniyak, or Mohican people, who are stewards of this land. Today, the community resides in Wisconsin and is known as the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican Nation. We pay honor and respect to their ancestors, past and present. Voices is a library lecture series that presents speakers on timely and enduring topics each semester to broaden and enrich the scope of studies at Hudson Valley Community College. Please fill out the survey that you will see on your streaming page. This helps us understand how to better serve you, what topics you might be interested in. And we encourage your questions. Please email your questions to the address shown on the streaming page, and we will ask as many as we have time for. Today, we are pleased and honored to welcome Alexis Goldsmith, who is the organizing director for Beyond Plastics at Bennington College. Beyond Plastics is a national project working to end plastic pollution. And I would like to add that Beyond Plastics was founded by our local environmental hero and champion, Judith Enck, a former regional director of the Environmental Protection Agency under President Obama. You can hear Judith every Friday morning on WAMC Radio's Roundtable program. Before joining Beyond Plastics, Alexis Goldsmith served as the executive producer for the Sanctuary for Independent Media's community radio program, the Hudson Valley Magazine, and she coordinated College City Growers, an urban permaculture and teaching garden. Alexis grew up in Indiana and is a graduate of Indiana University. We are pleased and honored to welcome Alexis Goldsmith. Thank you.
Thank you for that warm welcome, Bonnie, and welcome to everybody here. And I'm just gonna dive right into some slides. So there again is my name and my email. I welcome everybody to please email me if you want to chat more about organizing, want to get involved with anything that you see in this presentation, or just want to learn more about Beyond Plastics. So just my first name, last name, Alexis Goldsmith at bennington.edu. Here is our contact information for Beyond Plastics. If you're really interested in this topic, I highly recommend going to our website and signing up for our email list. So beyondplastics.org/sign up. Or you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So before I get into today's presentation, I just want to remind everyone here that you have the power to be a change maker in this world. If you don't know who this person is, this is Greta Thunberg, the Swedish high school student who started School Strikes for Future, where students around the world would walk out of school on Fridays to protest government inaction on climate change. And there are many young climate and environmental justice activists in the United States and around the world. This is Xiuhtezcatl Martinez, who was the youth director of Earth Guardians. Xiuhtezcatl has spoken before the United Nations General Assembly in English, Spanish, and Nahuatl on the effects of fossil fuels on Indigenous and marginalized communities. So I'm here today to talk to you about plastics and the connection between plastics, climate change, and environmental justice. I'm going to cover a lot of information in the next half hour. We're going to go on a wild ride through the production process of how plastic is made. So I just want to politely request, if you're watching right now, to refrain from multitasking and just stay present with me while I go over this information. I find this subject really engrossing, and I think that you will find it interesting also. So 99% of plastics today are manufactured from fossil fuels. In the US, the majority of plastics are manufactured from ethane, which is a cheap byproduct of hydraulic fracturing. So last October, Beyond Plastics released a report that examined the climate impacts of production, use, and disposal of plastics in the United States. And the major findings of this report are that in 2020, US plastics released more than 230 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, the same emissions as 116 average 500 megawatt coal-fired power plants. At least 42 plastics facilities have opened since 2019 in the US, are under construction, or are in the permitting process. And if these facilities become fully operational, these new plastic plants could release an additional 55 million tons of greenhouse gases, the equivalent of an additional 27 average coal-fired power plants. The production of plastic is a matter of serious environmental injustice. And this report added further evidence that environmental racism is a serious issue in the United States. So plastics can be made from oil, coal, and gas, but today most plastic in the US is manufactured from fracked ethane gas. Hydraulic fracturing is a method of extracting shale gas from deep underground deposits. The process has a high risk of contaminating drinking water because it passes through aquifers. So basically, the gas company will inject millions of gallons of water mixed with sand and chemicals deep underground to fracture the bedrock, and then they can extract the gas that is deposited there. So fracking has boomed in the United States, resulting in a gas glut, which means that there is more gas than markets can absorb. So plastics manufacturing from ethane, which was a waste product of fracking, provides a new revenue source for oil and gas companies. So like I said, to frack a well, the gas company pumps millions of gallons of water mixed with chemicals and sand deep underground, fracturing the bedrock so the pockets of gas can be extracted. So this slurry of water, chemicals, and gas and sand come back out of the well, along with radon and naturally occurring radioactive isotopes from deep underground. It is from this radioactive slurry that ethane is separated to make plastics, along with waste products and also methane, which is the natural gas we use, such as in cooking, gas stoves, and heating our houses. So this is a still from the movie Gasland, which, believe it or not, was released in 2010. In that time, we better understand the impacts of fracking, but not much has changed from a regulatory standpoint. In the year 2000, there were about 25,000 fracking wells in the United States. Now there are more than 1.7 million. At the end of their life, the wells are often abandoned and continue to leak methane. Many groups are vocal that fracking should be banned entirely due to its water and health impacts. The health damages of fracking are estimated to be between $13 and $29 billion each year. So in our report, Beyond Plastics report, The New Coal, Plastics and Climate Change, we looked at the emissions from fracking in order to produce plastics. So this key in our report shows the equivalent yearly emissions from fracking for plastics as coal-fired power plants. Each shaded symbol represents 2 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Each unshaded symbol shows the potential emissions from the expansion of fracking for plastics by the year 2025. In 2020, Fracking for Plastics released the equivalent emissions of 18 coal-fired power plants, with the potential for an additional 6 million tons of emissions just by the year 2025. So many of the emissions from fracking, as I said, are methane, which is an extremely potent greenhouse gas. Methane lasts about 12 years in the atmosphere, but during that time, it is more than 80 times more efficient than carbon dioxide at trapping heat. So I mentioned also that fracking wells bring up naturally occurring radioactive isotopes. That radioactivity accumulates in the wastewater and in the oil and gas equipment. This is a screenshot of a groundbreaking article that was published in the Rolling Stone in 2019, which detailed how scandalously unregulated radioactive fracking waste is. The author of this article is Justin Noble, and he's actually an upstate New York resident, and he's currently writing a book on this subtopic, which I really look forward to reading. Here's a screenshot of some of the text in that Rolling Stone article. So what happens to the fracking waste is unfortunately anyone's guess, as there are minimal regulations on oil and gas waste. Much of it winds up in injection wells, which I'll get to in a moment. A report from Food and Water Watch has documented that fracking waste has been used to irrigate agricultural crops in states that have drought issues. And also in Ohio, 2 proposed state bills would allow for the commodification of fracking wastewater for purposes like de-icing roads. So we're following the ethane gas from the fracking well until it is made into plastic. So once the ethane is separated from that slurry that comes out of the fracking well, it is transported with pipelines. This stage of plastic production also releases emissions. There are more than 3 million miles of oil and gas pipelines in the United States, with more projects proposed each year. This is a photo of the Mariner East 2 pipeline across Pennsylvania that goes to the East Coast. This pipeline was built to send ethane from the Marcellus and Utica shale basins in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia overseas to be made into plastics. The sheer length of pipelines in the United States continues to grow, contributing to the ongoing expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure. The good news is that we have seen some divestments from major pipelines like the infamous Keystone XL pipeline, but Enbridge's Line 3 and Line 5 pipelines and the Mountain Valley pipeline through Appalachia are facing ongoing opposition, though they receive very little media attention compared to other issues in the United States today. On the left is Winona LaDuke. She is an Anishinaabe Indigenous leader who, like many Indigenous peoples, are often unseen by corporate news media. Winona has dedicated her life to advocating for Indigenous control of their homelands, natural resources, and cultural practices. The Enbridge Line 3 pipeline, which was recently completed, runs through major water bodies in Anishinaabe territory in Minnesota. Winona LaDuke was arrested along with more than 600 Indigenous people and their allies defending Anishinaabe land from Line 3. So Line 3, just a side note, is owned by Enbridge, a Canadian company. And in a Democracy Now! Interview after her arrest, Winona LaDuke told Democracy Now! Host Amy Goodman that Enbridge was paying the Minnesota police who arrested her to protect their pipeline from the protesters, and that the Minnesota police wanted the contract with Enbridge so that they could pay for weapons upgrades. So continuing to follow the ethane gas from the fracking well until it is made into plastics. Ethane that has been separated from the fracking slurry goes into the supply chain. It may need to be stored before it goes to a plastics factory, so gas liquids and fracking wastewater are frequently stored in injection wells. Injection wells are underground caverns that have been carved from deep salt formations. They are usually not natural. There are approximately 180,000 Class II oil and gas injection wells in the United States. That's enough that if the injection wells lined up from New York City to LA, there would be an injection well every 82 feet. A single well could hold millions of gallons of gas or fracking wastewater. There are some explosion risks and other dangers associated with injection wells. just as with all oil and gas infrastructure. The danger with injection wells is that the gas can leak underground and can travel underground and then explode elsewhere. This is really complicated by abandoned underground structures like mines. Injection wells also create a sinkhole risk. So this is a photo of the Bayou Corn sinkhole in Assumption Parish, Louisiana, that was caused by a salt cavern that collapsed. The cavern was owned by Occidental Petroleum and operated by Texas Brine Company. The sinkhole spans 37 acres and is 750 feet deep. The town had to be evacuated. So moving through the plastic supply chain, the ethane finally reaches the plastics factory. Ethane gas, along with chemicals called plasticizers, are manufactured into plastics at a facility called an ethane cracker. The ethane goes through a series of chemical reactions to be turned into ethylene, which is then strung into polyethylene. Plasticizers give the plastic its desirable characteristics like flexibility or softness, and these plasticizers also contribute to air pollution from these facilities. The market has been filled with cheap single-use plastics in part because of the fracking boom. So plastics manufacturing is rapidly expanding in the US. 2 weeks ago, I took this photo, which shows the unfinished ethane cracker on the Ohio River in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. This is the first such facility in Appalachia. The American Chemistry Council, which is the interest group that represents plastics, oil, and gas, projects that the region, which sits on the Marcellus and Utica shale basins, could support up to 5 ethane crackers. Once completed, this facility will pump out 18 million tons of virgin polyethylene every year. I saw this facility in person. It has its own rail yard, and I was told that once this facility is in production, it will fill 100 rail cars every day with polyethylene. So virgin plastic itself in the United States is expected to quadruple by 2050 without intervention. And you can see in the key in our report, these are the equivalent emissions to coal-fired power plants in 2021 and the projected emissions from expansion by 2025. So also from our report, The New Coal, these are the 18 communities in the United States where 90% of the emissions from manufacturing are released. I think something that contributes to the fact that many people don't know about the pollution from plastics manufacturing is that the emissions are released into such a small number of communities. And most of these communities are Black, Brown, and Indigenous. They are actually 2/3 more likely to be Black, Brown, and Indigenous. So it's concentrated mostly in Louisiana and Texas, but now increasingly in Appalachia. So like I just said, the production of plastics contributes largely to environmental injustice and environmental racism. It also contributes to disproportionate health problems in those communities and a lower quality of life. The extraction and production of plastics also has major climate impacts, especially from the methane emissions. Plastics also release emissions as they break down into microplastics in waterways or landfills, or when they are burned in incinerators. So they continue to release emissions throughout their whole life cycle, not just during the production stage. In fact, if plastic were a country, it would be the 5th largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world, with an estimated 1.7 gigatons of emissions every year. That's twice that the emissions of the entire aviation industry. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but the international scientific community agrees that we have less than 10 years to avert the worst consequences of climate change. But there's also a strong argument that inequality and environmental racism contribute more to climate change than population. This photo is of Rise St. James, a community-based environmental justice group in St. James Parish, Louisiana. Formosa Plastics, a Taiwanese-based company, intends to build the largest plastics manufacturing plant in the United States on 2,500 acres in St. James, in an historically Black community that is already affected by heavy industry, including Marathon and Valero. Not only is the Formosa site, which is a former sugarcane plantation, located on hundreds of acres of imperiled wetlands, the site contains the graves of people who were enslaved, whose descendants are still alive today. And this photo is of Rice St. James honoring their graves during a Juneteenth celebration. And this is the face of plastics. This is a screenshot from a press conference held by the American Chemistry Council right after the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act was introduced in 2021. They were urging Congress not to pass legislation to block chemical recycling, which is another word for plastic incineration. And I just like to include this image because I'm sure that nobody in this press conference lives next to one of these facilities. So the end result of the ethane being turned into plastic is nurdles. Nurdles are tiny lentil-sized pieces of plastic that plastic products like bags are made from. They are shipped from the ethane crackers by barge, rail, and truck to be made into things like shopping bags and single-use plastic packaging. The nurdles are their own major source of pollution. They spill wherever they are transported, and it's estimated that 250,000 tons of nurdles leak into waterways each year just from plastic production facilities. So I referenced Beyond Plastics report, the new coal, plastic, and climate change several times, but I also highly recommend this 2019 report from Food and Water Watch, which details the expansion of fracking in the United States. Also, just follow Food and Water Watch. They are a fantastic organization and resource. So to recap, we just followed the ethane gas from the fracking well to the ethane cracker, where it is made into polyethylene plastic. Soda bottles are a common market for high-density polyethylene. Did you know that Coca-Cola produces 200,000 plastic bottles every minute? This is a public service announcement about drinking from plastic bottles because most bottled water contains microplastics. This is just another reason that we all need access to clean drinking water. So since 1950, the world has produced more than 8 billion tons of plastic. That means that there is more than 1 ton of plastic for every person on Earth. Globally, nearly 400 million tons of virgin plastic are produced every year, and nearly half of that new plastic is for single-use packaging. And while plastic production is increasing, plastic recycling does not work and will never work as a solution to this waste crisis. Less than 9% of plastic waste has been recycled. Only 2% has been effectively recycled, meaning that it wasn't eventually disposed of. It is estimated that 1/3 of all plastic waste has found its way into the environment. So I ask everyone to consider that in terms of recycling and what the solutions are for this problem. The myth of recycling has actually contributed to the international environmental and social justice issue of waste colonialism. For decades, wealthy countries have shipped plastic waste and dumped it into countries that were economically disadvantaged, leading to open landfills and incinerators that compound existing inequalities. Plastic in the environment also has huge impacts on wildlife. The most documented impacts have been to marine life. Thousands of marine animals mistake plastic for food in waterways. And this is an infamous photo of an albatross chick that actually starved to death after being fed plastic. There was no more room in its stomach for actual food. Sadly, once plastic has killed an animal, the plastic remains and can go on to hurt another animal. Humans are also ingesting plastic. Plastic pollution in the environment breaks down into microplastics, which contaminate our food, water, and air. One study found that the average person ingests a credit card's worth of plastic every week. This is concerning because plastic contains chemicals that are endocrine disruptors and/or carcinogenic. Also, another PSA, chemicals can be used to line food packaging. PFOAs can be used as a grease-proof barrier in lots of different kinds of packaging, and they can also be used in compostables, so bad news there. So the PFOA, you'll find it in the microwave popcorn bags and also in fast food wrappers. And a word on compostables is that I would just avoid them if you can in favor of reuse and refill. We don't want forever chemicals in our bodies or our compost, and many hard compostables do not get composted and simply contaminate compost. Also, less than 5% of compostable packaging products are actually composted. So why is this happening? Well, as the world reckons with climate change and green energy and electric vehicles become more common, the fossil fuel industry is looking for new markets to continue justifying extraction of fossil fuels. And one of those markets is plastic. But at Beyond Plastics, we think that the world is too big to fail, and we really want to save our special home. So what the heck are we going to do about it? Well, let's talk about what we do about it. So first of all, we need to get this issue in front of as many people as possible. Beyond Plastics offers a course in plastic pollution with a focus on public action that is open to anyone online. Enrollment is open if you're interested. It is $400 for credit or $100 to audit. You can find the info for this course at beyondplastics.org. And another thing we do is we focus on empowering people to take public action. So we need to build a grassroots movement to pass legislation that will address this problem. This is a climate issue. This is a voting issue. This is a racism issue, a labor issue, a health issue. At Beyond Plastics, educating people also means educating reporters and lawmakers. So we work to connect the dots for lawmakers and the media so that they will be motivated to act and make better decisions. So my role at Beyond Plastics as an organizer is working with my colleagues to support other grassroots organizers. I meet with volunteers around the world, I'm sorry, not around the country, we're not that big, who are working on the plastics issue. Recently, a group in Illinois were able to get their Congress member to co-sponsor the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. They organized constituent meetings, they tabled at the farmers market, they had a postcard mail-in, and they went to town halls. The grassroots movement is also growing on campuses, and this is something I would encourage everyone here to participate in if you're not already, is to organize as students and faculty and lead the way in eliminating single-use plastics on campus. This list is just some of the feats that the State University of New York at New Paltz was able to accomplish through student organizing. You can find a fact sheet on how they were able to get single-use plastic bottles out of vending machines on our website at beyondplastics.org/act. California State took it a step further and banned single-use plastics altogether. And you can also download their policy from our website or just do an internet search for California State University plastic policy. It's only one page long. It's very simple. Another thing you can do is host a screening of The Story of Plastic. This is an Emmy-nominated documentary from Story of Stuff and was produced by an upstate woman named Dea Schlossberg. We use this film a lot for organizing, so we like to do screenings and then host a panel discussion afterward. You can find this at storyofstuff.org. There are also many local issues that you can learn about or even organize with. This is a photo of the Lafarge Holcomb cement plant. Lafarge Holcomb is an international company, and they have been lobbying for years to burn waste and tires as fuel in its kiln in Ravenna, New York. This plant is located just across the street from the local public school. Residents around Lafarge have successfully been able to prevent Lafarge from burning waste by organizing, but Lafarge is still working with the local and county government to burn waste at the plant. If you're interested in learning more, check out the Queens Clean Air Coalition at cleanairalbanycounty.org. Another local issue is the Dunn Construction and Debris Landfill in the city of Rensselaer. This is a 99-acre landfill that shares a property line with the Rensselaer Public School. Local residents have been organizing to shut it down. The landfill brings hundreds of heavy trucks full of waste every week through the small town. You can check them out at RensselaerEnvironmentalCoalition.org. There's also an incinerator in Cohoes, New York. You may have read about it in the local newspaper after it burned PFAS-containing firefighting foam. This facility doesn't burn plastic waste as far as I know, but it does burn hazardous waste from all over the country. Because Norlite has more than 30 years of violations to its air toxics permit, and it's currently a major source of pollution, residents have been organizing to shut the plant down. It's currently in the process of renewing its federal permits with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Last year, Lights Out Norlite organized a sunflower planting around Norlite in the public housing complex that shares a property line with this plant. And the sunflower planting was meant to be a healing activity. It was inspired by peace activist Kathy Kelly, who was arrested in the 1980s for planting corn on nuclear missile silos in the United States. You can learn more about the Norlite issue at lightsoutnorlite.org. I also like to use memes to communicate the issue because they're fun and relatable. I made these memes using Canva, canva.com. It's a really easy, free graphic design tool. So if you enjoyed this presentation, I strongly encourage you to follow Beyond Plastics. We are not focused on recycling. We are focused on reducing single-use plastics and stopping the build out of the petrochemical industry in the United States. There are our social media handles and our website. And again, you can email me at alexisgoldsmith@bennington.edu. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Alexis, I thought I knew something about plastics. I'm speechless. This is astounding. So much information. It's incredible. I have several questions here, and if those of you who are listening haven't submitted a question and have one, please email that question into the address that's posted on your streaming page. We have a few minutes, so please feel free to ask. I have so many thoughts here. I'm not even sure where to start, but I'm going to ask this first question, which is, you said that every human being is ingesting the equivalent of about a credit card amount of plastics every week. Is that right?
Yes.
Where are we mostly getting this from? Is it from using water bottles? Is it food? Is it air? Where are we getting this, Alexis?
We are getting this from plastic pollution in the environment, which breaks down into microplastics. We know that plants can take in microplastics, but also the animals that we eat are eating microplastics. We're also breathing it because 2 to 6% of household dust is microplastic. So we're getting it from a variety of sources, but you can protect yourself from it and reduce how much plastic you're ingesting by avoiding plastic packaging, because one theory is that the water bottles are contaminated because when you twist off the plastic cap, it creates microplastics that then fall into the water. So avoiding eating and drinking food out of plastic if you can. This is an equality issue, of course, because not everyone has access to reuse and refill. Just, keeping that in mind. I have a water filter on my tap, like a $40 pure filter that reduces the microplastics. So there are steps you can take.
So Alexis, what about when you talk about food and packaging? I'm thinking about, isn't there a liner, like a plastic liner, like inside coffee cups or inside our milk containers or in box soup, that kind of thing? Are there certain things of that nature we should avoid using? Plastic bottles seem obvious to me, but what about the subtle places we find plastic?
Sure. Well, you're absolutely right. There is a plastic liner inside of disposable coffee cups. For that reason, I always bring my reusable coffee mug wherever I go. This is stainless steel because, I think when I pour that hot coffee into a disposable cup, whatever plastics are, whatever chemicals are in that liner are going to leach into my coffee, and I don't want to be ingesting that. Unfortunately, the chemicals that are added to plastic, there's tens of thousands of them, and they are not monitored by the federal government in any way for contaminating food, except for a few that, like BPA is one. Phthalates have gotten a lot of attention recently. But again, my advice is just avoid plastic packaging whenever you can, and do reuse and refill whenever you're able to.
There's a question about the chemicals used to frack. There are lots of chemicals that are injected into the ground with the water when they are fracking. Do we know what they are, what they do? How dangerous is all of that?
Great question. We did recently learn that PFAS chemicals have been added to that fracking water, but for the most part, we don't know what's in the fracking water because the gas companies claim that as a proprietary information, so they don't have to reveal what they're adding to that water.
So that means that when you're talking about leakage, whatever those chemicals are could be leaking into the water table.
It happens. They can contaminate the water table, or the injection wells where they store the wastewater can also leak at the wellhead of the injection well. It's like a cement casing at the top, and those can crack because of temperature changes or seismic activities, and then the contents of the injection well can leak. So people have had their water contaminated by fracking. It's very unfortunate.
I just want to remind people again that if you have a question, you can email it to library@hvcc.edu. We're monitoring that, and then we can ask those questions to Alexis. I'm wondering, here's another question about the percentage of global warming, climate warming, that is plastics contribute to. You talked about it being the 5th largest contributor, but I'm thinking in terms of breaking this down. The question has to do with, we look at what is greater. Is it transportation? Is it deforestation? Is it animal agriculture? What are the categories that contribute to global warming, and where does plastic fit in that?
I think plastic is a largely unaccounted for category. Our report, The New Coal, Plastics and Climate Change, built on a 2019 report from the Center for International Environmental Law of the same title, Plastics and Climate Change. The CL report looked at the international emissions from plastics, whereas ours just looked at the United States emissions. But our report was really the first that we know of that took a comprehensive look at the full life cycle impacts of plastics. So I think plastic is a dark horse when it comes to climate change that not many people are aware of, and we really need more people, especially the media and policymakers, to understand this connection.
Thank you. So I did hear you say, I just want to restate this to make sure I understood this correctly. You're saying that as people are switching, for example, to more electric cars, or we're working towards electrifying things, that the market for the sale of gas and oil is declining. Is it fair to say then that the fossil fuel companies are switching their attention then to the production of plastics to keep the sales of fossil fuels rising?
Yes, that is the conclusion of our report. I think that factor, it's also the fact of over extraction. So like I mentioned, there's a gas glut in the United States, which was documented in that 2019 report from Food and Water Watch. So it's not just that people are switching to electric vehicles or clean energy, it's that there's more gas than they can sell. So they're looking for new markets for that gas also, and that is plastics.
Here's a question about recycling. Some of the local recycling companies say that they're recycling all the plastics from 1 to 7 and just throw them all in. Is that not true? What do you think?
That is not true. Only plastics 1 and 2 generally are recycled. Those are things like Coca-Cola bottles. In New York State, for example, we have a bottle bill, so much of those bottles are returned to be recycled. But the other types of plastic are pretty worthless, if not impossible to recycle. So what complicates recycling is that many materials today are mixed packaging. So they have different types of materials in the packaging or different types of plastic, and you can't separate the different types. And also the recycler doesn't know what type of plastic it is. So it's worthless, it's impossible to recycle. It ends up in a landfill, incinerator, or in the environment.
Well, so are you saying that if we are trying to recycle, that we should only put 1s and 2s in the bin?
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest just goes in the regular trash?
Yep.
Wow.
And never put plastic bags in the bin. They clog up the recycling machines. And then they have to shut down the facility, and the workers actually have to crawl up with box cutters and cut the bags free.
Wow. You talked, Alexis, about leaking emissions, and I'm wondering in the source of fracking, do we know, is there more leaking from the drilling process or from going through the pipes, or where are the biggest emissions noted, or is it the flaring, that kind of thing?
So the emissions come from every stage of the process, and it's what you can't see that's more dangerous. You can't really see methane emissions except with an infrared camera. Frac Tracker Alliance has some really great images of methane leaking from like fracking well pads, but it leaks at every stage of the process, from the extraction to the pipelines to the factory, up until it's made into a plastic nurdle.
Right. Here's one that just came, 2 questions that came in. It says, there are any grocery stores or other businesses that are starting to reduce the amount of plastic they are using?
Yes, there are. There are many reuse and refill initiatives that are starting. They're at a disadvantage because plastics are so cheap, because fossil fuels are heavily subsidized in the United States. But more and more people want access to plastic-free packaging. So I think that is increasing. I think I have an example. So, for example, there are companies that are trying to do reusable takeout trays for restaurants. So restaurants can participate in a program where the company will basically provide them with the reusable trays, and then the company washes them for the restaurant, so the restaurant doesn't have to wash them themselves. This is from Redish, which is in New York City. But there's a few initiatives, especially in larger cities, to do this. I think the capital region would really do well with one. But there needs to be more done for sure on reuse and refill.
This one I think we've covered, but the question says, on the topic of recycling, you mentioned it will not work. Should we not be recycling our plastics at home, or just put them in the garage to take them to the landfill. Are you saying stop purchasing plastic, which will cut down on the consumption of plastic and its effect on the environment?
Yeah, this is a complicated thing. So I guess what I'm saying is that individual action is important to reduce plastics, but it's important to not feel guilty for how much plastic you're consuming because it's really not your fault. The market is just flooded with single-use plastics. As far as recycling, put 1 and 2 plastics in the recycling bin. If they're bottles with a deposit on them, take those to a redemption center. That's the best way to guarantee that those plastics will get recycled. And stop purchasing plastic if you can. That's always a great thing to do. But what we really need are new laws and regulations to reduce single-use plastics. So in January of this year, for example, New York State's polystyrene ban went into effect. So if you see restaurants passing out polystyrene takeout containers, let them know that those are now illegal to use, and they shouldn't be using them anymore. New York State also has a plastic bag ban. That's great. We really could use a straws upon request bill, which has just been introduced into the state legislature by Assemblymember Rosenthal. So we need state and federal action to reduce single-use plastics. That's what we need.
So for example, at Hudson Valley, I haven't been over there quite recently, but when you say polystyrene, we're talking about styrofoam cups for coffee, right? Those are now illegal?
Yeah, well, you can purchase them in a store, like in a package, if you want to use them at home, but they cannot be given out by a retail, retailer like the plastic bag ban. They can't be given at the point of sale. So takeout containers, coffee cups, polystyrene is now banned in New York State.
Okay. We probably got time for a couple more. So it seems almost obvious to say I'm going to bring my reusable coffee cup or water bottle and stop buying single-use plastic bottles. But are there other places that we could make change in our life in which plastic is not so obvious? In our clothes and shopping online, packaging, that kind of thing?
Yeah, the way we can make change is to organize. So think about the networks that you're in and where you can make change at a community level to reduce single-use plastics. So one initiative I've been working on is helping Meals on Wheels programs switch from these single-use containers to reusable containers. You can work to get plastic bottles out of vending machines in favor of aluminum cans. That's another great initiative. So maybe a Hudson Valley Community College, you could work on the vending machines there, or even get a resolution passed like the California State University policy that bans single-use plastics on campus.
Fantastic. Fleece clothing, is that true? It's all made from plastics. Oh.
Unfortunately, many clothes today are made from plastics. Actually, that's what HDPE, high density polyethylene bottles are made into clothing.
I'm wondering, Alexis, if there are some final things that you didn't cover that you want to say to us, or things that you want to re-say to emphasize, because I realize that we all, and I'm pausing here for a minute. Let me just say that sometimes this just feels really overwhelming. You listen to all of this and you think, well, they stopped the Keystone XL pipeline, so the problem is solved. And then when I listen to your talk, it feels really overwhelming sometimes. And so I'm wondering if you have final thoughts about what to do. How do you keep hopeful? How do you go on in the face of such difficult things?
Yeah, my best advice is to empower yourself by organizing and getting involved in a civic way. So a great thing you can do is follow Beyond Plastics. That's literally what I help people do, is help people organize. So I help people do things like hold a constituent meeting with their representatives. So I coach them on how to do an effective meeting, basically to educate their representative and then ask them, to co-sponsor a specific bill, like the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. And other things we do are, helping people organize rallies. We help people organize call-in days to representatives. Like we did a call-in day to the DEC to enforce the plastic bag ban, which resulted in notices of violation. So the best thing you can do is just find a way to get involved, and so that you don't feel powerless, so that you feel like you are doing something. And another thing I do is just follow Indigenous and Black and Brown creators on social media so that I can listen to what they're saying, and that makes me a better organizer.
That's great. Thank you. This is really fantastic, Alexis. I can see that there's a great deal of work to be done. And I want to just echo again about spreading the word and reaching out to policymakers that have the ability to change the laws and affect change on a much larger level than, even though it's important for us to continue to do what we can on the individual level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're not in it alone. You don't have to do it all by yourself. I tell myself that every day.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because otherwise you just feel alone. So the cure for overwhelm is action.
Mm-hmm.
Cure for overwhelm is action. Terrific. Thank you, Alexis. We deeply appreciate you giving your time and your expertise to us at Hudson Valley. If you want to give your contact information one more time in case people have further questions or want to reach out to you. And again, our deepest thanks for spending the afternoon with us.
Yes, so my email is alexisgoldsmith@bennington.edu. If you want to know something that you can do to get involved right now, please email me, and our website is beyondplastics.org.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Please put in your suggestions for future topics and come to our lecture series. We deeply appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you to our lovely interpreter, Denise. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise.